If you've ever felt that wealth seems to whisper its secrets only to a chosen few, while the rest of the world strains to hear an echo, then listen closely, because what I'm about to share may feel uncomfortably true. The world is not designed to hand you prosperity. It's designed to test how badly you want to understand it. And the people who master money early rarely talk about the rules they've learned, not because they're cruel or selfish, but because the lessons themselves are often forged in experiences so mundane, so unglamorous, and so painfully obvious in hindsight that most people simply don't want to hear them. But you're here, which means you might just be ready for a little truth delivered without sugarcoating, the way I always preferred things. When I was young, before Berkshire Hathaway, before the speeches and the books that people now quote as though they came down from Mount Sinai, I learned that wealth doesn't come to the cleverest person in the room. It comes to the one who avoids the most stupidity over the longest period of time. That's a strange realization for a society obsessed with brilliance. Everybody wants to be dazzlingly intelligent, but very few people want to be quietly rational. And the rich, the real rich, not the noisy kind who flash cars and watches, but the ones who live comfortably for decades and generations, they figure this out early. They learn to avoid the big mistakes, the bad debts, the reckless risks, the impatience that makes you chase every shiny idea. They learn that you don't need 20 great opportunities in your life. You might only get 3 or 4, and if you're prepared when they arrive, that's enough. Most people, however, are too busy chasing scraps to ever notice the banquet. I remember watching people around me, good people, hard-working people, who thought that money came from heroism, from one big swathe, from some dramatic financial home run. But wealth, actual enduring wealth, tends to come from a series of small, unremarkable decisions performed consistently and almost boringly well. You save a little more than you spend. You invest in things you actually understand. You let compounding work for you without poking at it like a child digging up a plant to see if the roots are growing. And this is where most folks fail. They want excitement, entertainment, confirmation that they're special. But money doesn't care about your ego. It cares about your behavior. The rich learn that early. They stop trying to look rich and quietly start behaving in ways that lead to richness over time. And if you want the truth, the biggest wealth lesson I discovered before I even had real money was that your mind is your most valuable asset, not in the abstract, motivational speaker way, but in the very practical sense that a well-trained mind can keep you from financial ruin. You don't need to predict the future. You just need to avoid being a fool in the present. You don't need perfect timing. You just need to stay in the game long enough for the odds to tilt in your favor. Most people lose because they quit too early, or because they never learn to tolerate a little discomfort. The rich learn to sit with boredom. They learn patience, which is the least glamorous and most profitable skill in the world. While others panic at turbulence, they stay strapped in and let the plane ride out the storm. I've always said that the world is full of foolish gamblers, and they never seem to understand why they lose. But the rich, they learn that unless you're intentionally building optionality is wonderful. You shouldn't make your life harder than it needs to be. They seek simplicity. A simple plan followed diligently beats a perfect plan executed inconsistently. A simple envy. Adjustment held for decades beats a complex strategy that dazzles you for a year and destroys you the next. But people chase the complex because it feels smart. The wealthy chase the simple because it works. So as we begin this journey together, I want you to understand that none of these lessons are mystical. They aren't locked in vaults or whispered in private cigar lounges. They live in plain sight. but only a prepared mind can see them. And if you're willing to listen without defensiveness, without clinging to the illusions sold by financial entertainers, then this might be the first step in changing how you approach money, success, and even your own life decisions. You don't need to be extraordinary, you just need to avoid being foolish for long enough. Was about opening your eyes to the quiet, unglamorous truth behind wealth. Then part 2 is about wandering a little deeper into the mental models that the rich internalize long before they ever see a large bank balance. One of the most misunderstood ideas in the world is that wealth comes from opportunity. It doesn't. Wealth comes from preparation meeting opportunity. Without preparation, opportunity simply passes you by like a train you weren't ready to board. And preparation isn't glamorous. It's hours of reading, thinking, observing, and refusing to be distracted by every noise that modern life throws at you. People ask me how to get rich. I tell them, start by training your mind to see clearly. Most people don't actually want clarity. They want reassurance. The rich learn early that reassurance is a costly addiction. Let me tell you something that might feel a bit uncomfortable. Most of the wealthiest people I've met were not the most talented in their field, nor the most charismatic, nor even the most disciplined in the traditional sense. What they did possess was an almost stubborn refusal to participate in the madness of the crowd when everyone else was losing their mind, whether chasing speculative bubbles or panicking at temporary downturns. These people remained calm. They learned early that emotional control is the real currency of long-term success. If you cannot control your impulses, your fears, your envy, your need for approval, then the market and life will exploit you without mercy. Wealth is built in the mind long before it appears in your accounts. If you don't develop that internal resilience, any wealth you do manage to gain will eventually slip through your fingers. I've spent much of my life watching how people behave when money is at stake. And the truth is, your relationship with money is a reflection of your relationship with yourself. People who feel insecure try to buy confidence. People who feel insignificant try to buy status. People who feel lost try to buy clarity. The rich, at least the ones who stay rich, learn early that money cannot substitute for character. It can only amplify who you already are. That is why building wealth requires you to understand yourself with brutal honesty. The rich don't pretend their weaknesses aren't there. They design systems to protect themselves from their own worst tendencies. They don't rely on willpower. They rely on structure. They don't rely on motivation. They rely on habits. And they don't rely on luck. They rely on behavior that produces luck over time. Another thing I've noticed over the years is that most people think in days or weeks, but the wealthy think in decades. And that single shift from short-term thinking to long-term thinking is one of the great dividing lines between financial frustration and financial freedom. When you stop asking, how can I get rich fast, and start asking, how can I avoid being poor slowly, you begin to behave differently. You avoid lifestyle inflation. You avoid unnecessary debt. You avoid the constant pressure to upgrade your life in ways that only make you more fragile. The rich learn the value of durability. They build financial structures that can survive storms, downturns, recessions, and occasionally their own mistakes. Because trust me, everyone makes mistakes. The question is whether your system is designed to withstand them. There's a kind of quiet humility the wealthy develop early on. Though it doesn't always look like humility from the outside, It's the humility of knowing that the world is complex, that markets are unpredictable, that you are not as smart as your best day makes you feel, nor as dumb as your worst day suggests. This humility keeps you from overestimating your abilities and underestimating risk. And risk, by the way, is never what people think it is. Risk is what's left after you've thought about everything you think you've thought about. The rich embrace this idea early. They accept uncertainty instead of pretending they can eliminate it. They plan for the unexpected. They keep buffers, margin of safety, redundancy. They understand that winning doesn't always look like being right. Sometimes it looks like avoiding being catastrophically wrong. So as we continue, understand this. The wealth lessons that the rich rarely explain aren't hidden. They're simply ignored because they require patience, self-awareness, and the humility to admit that slow, steady, unexciting behavior builds more prosperity than any flashy plan ever will. But once you internalize this truth, once you begin living it rather than merely hearing it, you start to shift from chasing wealth to attracting it, and that shift makes all the difference. Before we step fully into this part, I want you to understand something profound that most people never grasp until life has squeezed them a bit. Wealth is less about acquiring things and more about shedding illusions. The rich learn early that the world runs on incentives, not intentions, and if you can't see the incentives behind people's actions, including your own, you'll forever misinterpret what's happening around you. I learned this harshly in my early career. Brilliant people would make baffling decisions, and I'd wonder, why in the world would anyone do that? But once you trace the incentive, the answer becomes embarrassingly simple. Incentives are the invisible strings that move the world. The wealthy learn to see those strings. Most people don't. And this brings us to a lesson as old as time. You must learn to play games you can actually win. Many people spend their entire lives competing in arenas where they have no edge, no knowledge advantage, no behavioral advantage, and no realistic shot at long-term success. They chase speculative investments they barely understand. They start businesses in fields they haven't studied. They stretch themselves thin, trying to impress people who aren't even paying attention. Meanwhile, the rich tend to choose games where the odds tilt slowly, quietly, but steadily in their favor. They focus on compounding skills, compounding relationships, compounding capital. They pick games where longevity matters more than intensity, where consistency beats brilliance, where you can be slightly above average for a very long time and come out far ahead of the insanely talented people who burn out after a few spectacular years. There's an old saying I used to repeat, "Show me the incentive, and I will show you the outcome." That line has saved me from more disasters than I care to admit. When you look at a business, an investment, a partnership, even a romantic relationship, you must ask yourself, what does each person stand to gain or lose? You'd be surprised how many people enter partnerships where the incentives are misaligned from day one. That's why relationships fall apart, why companies implode, why investors panic at the worst possible moment. The rich learn to structure their lives so that the incentives naturally guide everyone involved toward rational outcomes. And when that structure is in place, you don't need to rely on trust alone. The system itself supports good behavior. Trust is wonderful, but trust without structure is a time bomb. Another lesson the wealthy internalize early is that envy is not only corrosive, it's tremendously expensive. Envy makes you abandon good strategies for risky ones. It makes you buy things you cannot afford to impress people you do not like. It makes you resent success instead of learning from it. I've always said that envy is the one sin that provides no pleasure, and yet people cling to it as if it were some source of fuel. The rich learn to stay in their lane. They don't spend time comparing themselves to every neighbor, colleague, or stranger on the internet. They know that comparison is the enemy of concentration, and concentration is where real wealth is created. If you're spending your mental energy trying to keep up with others, you're not building anything for yourself. One of the great quiet truths of wealth is that the rich don't try to predict the future. They try to prepare for it. And preparation often looks like caution to the untrained eye. It looks like conservatism. It looks like saying no more often than yes. It looks like keeping reserves of cash, even when everyone else insists you're leaving money on the table. It looks like studying past mistakes instead of fantasizing about future jackpots. The wealthy understand that the world is full of things that can hurt you, but very few things that can ruin you if you're prepared. They aim first to avoid ruin. Everything else comes after. You'd be amazed how far you can go simply by never blowing yourself up. But perhaps the most counterintuitive lesson that the rich learn early, and almost never explain, is that success is a lagging indicator. Your habits appear long before your results. You eat poorly now, you pay for it later. You spend recklessly now, you suffer for it later. You invest wisely now, you prosper later. You cultivate strong relationships now, you benefit later. Most people use the timeline. They think success is immediate and failure is immediate. But the richest people I've known had an almost serene understanding that the consequences of today's behaviors will arrive on their own schedule. The wealthy live in a state of quiet patience, trusting in the mathematics of their habits. Most people live in a state of constant frustration, demanding results from behaviors they haven't yet committed to. And before we move on, I want to leave you with this. The rich are not magicians. They don't possess superhuman intellects or mystical secrets. They simply learn truths that others ignore, and they follow those truths for far longer than most people have the discipline to endure. If you begin to internalize these mental models, you start shifting from being reactive to being intentional, from being confused to being clear, from chasing wealth to building it quietly and rationally. By now you may be noticing a pattern. The richest people in the world aren't operating with hidden formulas or esoteric secrets. They're operating with clearer thinking, longer timelines, and a deeper respect for reality than most people can tolerate. And in Part 4, we step into some of the less glamorous but profoundly life-altering truths that the wealthy internalize early, often through painful experience. One of those truths is that your environment quietly determines your future. I don't mean the city you live in or the school you attended. I mean the people you allow into your inner circle. Long before they become wealthy, successful people learn to be ruthlessly selective about who influences their thoughts. You see, stupidity is contagious. So is impulsiveness. So is pessimism. So is irresponsibility. If you surround yourself with people addicted to short-term thinking, you will inevitably shrink your own time horizon. The rich learn early to avoid messy people, not because they feel superior, but because they understand how costly it is to clean up chaos that you didn't create. They know that relationships can be either accelerators or anchors, and most people drag anchors without even realizing it. One of the harshest lessons wealth teaches, and it teaches it repeatedly, is that self-pity is a financial poison. The rich do not indulge in the comforting lie that the world is unfairly aligned against them, even if at times it truly is. They don't waste emotional energy blaming circumstances, competitors, or fate. They focus on what is within their control, and they widen that circle of control through knowledge, discipline, and carefully chosen opportunities. Meanwhile, many people stay broke not for lack of intelligence, but because they cling to narratives that absolve them of responsibility. These stories feel good, but they steal your future. Wealthy people learn, often early and painfully, that you cannot accumulate anything, money, respect, opportunity, while nursing resentment toward the world. The world is indifferent. It doesn't hand out sympathy dividends. Another thing the rich learn early is that the most profitable thing you can do with money is to keep it. Not spend it, not flaunt it, not use it to inflate your identity. Keep it. Because money is a tool for creating choices, and choices are what build freedom. People think wealth buys yachts and vacations, but what it really buys is the power to say no to bad jobs, bad relationships, bad environments, bad opportunities. Wealth is the quiet ability to walk away. And yet most people trap themselves by spending money the moment they earn it, locking themselves into lifestyles that require constant inflows just to stay afloat. The rich understand the value of liquidity. They understand optionality. They understand that the ability to wait is a superpower, especially in a world addicted to immediacy. Let me tell you another unspoken truth. Wealthy people understand the difference between being busy and being productive. Most people drown themselves in activity because being busy feels like progress. It feels respectable. It feels socially acceptable. But the wealthy learn early that motion without direction is just a sophisticated form of procrastination. They learn to do fewer things, but to do them more intelligently. They learn to say no to distractions masked as opportunities. They learn that attention, not time, is the real scarce resource. The world is full of people who hustle themselves into exhaustion, but never into prosperity. The rich tilt the board in their favor, not through frantic action, but through deliberate, focused choices that compound over years. And there's a final lesson in this part, one that sounds simple but requires real maturity to accept. The rich understand that most problems solve themselves if you stop making them worse. Emotional problems, financial problems, relational problems, they all tend to escalate because people can't resist the urge to react impulsively. Someone insults them, they escalate. The market dips, they panic sell. A minor setback appears, they catastrophize. But the wealthy develop a strange, almost counterintuitive habit. They pause, they breathe, they let time do some of the work. I've seen fortunes saved simply because someone had the temperament to do nothing when everyone else was frantically doing something. Sometimes the most profitable skill in life is simply the ability to not shoot yourself in the foot. So if you're absorbing these ideas and feeling a quiet shift, that's good. Wealth begins with thinking, not thinking about money, but thinking about consequences, incentives, behavior, and long-term positioning. These aren't the lessons people brag about. They're the lessons people learn quietly, often painfully, and remember forever. By the time we arrive here, we already walked through some of the mental architecture that supports long-term wealth. Now we step into the deeper end, the lessons the rich learn early, not because they want to, but because wealth.